Welcome to On What Slender Threads. My name is Len. It is in traditions 7, 8, and 9 that Bill was fleshing out the structure of our society. Recall that our society is the worldwide fellowship of AA, and that in his essay on unity in the first tradition, he emphasized the hammering out of the structure of AA. Tradition 8, a critical part of that structure, is the bedrock on which all our service centers around the world are built. This presentation is based on a book that I wrote, On What Slender Threads, AA's 12 Traditions from a Historical Perspective. However, it is not necessary to buy the book unless you'd like to have it as a resource. It is my hope that these video presentations will highlight what I learned from studying research on AA's early history, from the literature available at the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous, and from the experiences and insights of AA friends all around the world. I am not a spokesperson for AA. Any inferences in this study are strictly my own and in no way reflect the opinion of Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope it will be helpful. Now, I hope you will forgive me for getting all poetic, but if Bill W. can get flowery, I thought, why can't I? Having explored traditions 1 through 7, Bill's composition is approaching a crescendo. His musical score opened with the attention-getting blast on the importance of AA unity, and melodically continued with how AAs could avoid discordant sounds and distracting noise. Tradition 8 provides the supporting notes needed so that AA's harmony can be heard by unseen alcoholics. AA will always be non-professional, but we will employ special workers who make our 12-step work possible. I hope you enjoyed that a little bit. I sure had a ball writing it. So here is my special preamble to Tradition 8. Almost entirely unorganized and completely non-professional, this mighty spiritual current is now flowing from alcoholics who are well to those who are sick. One alcoholic talking to another, that's all. No, this great life-giving stream can never be dammed up by paid do-gooders or professionals. We believe that paid staff should be recompensed in reasonable relation to the value of his or her similar services or abilities in the commercial world. Cheap help is apt to feel insecure and be inefficient. This is neither good spirituality nor good business. Tradition 8 says Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. Again, you will see Bill's intent to spell out the constraints for the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous in the original form, when he wrote, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional. We define professionalism as the occupation of counseling alcoholics for fees or hire. But we may employ alcoholics where they are going to perform those services for which we might otherwise have to engage non-alcoholics. Such special services may be well recompensed, but our usual AA 12-step work is never to be paid for. Well, let's scan some highlights from Bill's essay on Tradition 8. Bill starts out saying that Alcoholics Anonymous will never have a professional class. He says every time we've tried to professionalize the 12th step, our single purpose has been defeated. Alcoholics simply will not listen to a paid 12-stepper. Almost from the beginning, we have been positive that face-to-face work with the alcoholic who suffers could be based only on the desire to help and be helped. He says the money motive compromises the AA who talks for money and everything he says and does for his prospect. Few subjects have been the cause of more contention within our fellowship than professionalism, and that is involvement in fields related to alcohol. Caretakers, cooks, secretaries, authors. Notice the word authors. All these we have seen hotly assailed because they were making money out of AA. These workers, these laborers were not 12-step jobs at all. The critics attacked AA. Professionals, these workers of ours who were often doing the thankless tasks that no one else could or would do. And even greater furors were provoked when AA members began to run rest homes, farms for alcoholic, hired out to corporations, and so forth and so on. But he says, at last, however, a plain line of cleavage could be seen between professionalism and non-professionalism. When we had agreed that 12-step could not be sold for money, we had been wise. But when we had declared that our fellowship couldn't hire service workers, nor could any AA member carry our knowledge into other fields, we were taking the counsel of fear, fear which today has been largely dispelled in light of experience. So referring back to the club janitor and cook, the person who answers the phone, he says clearly the job was not to do 12-step work, it was to make 12-step work possible. The status of these faithful servants who did the 12-step, made 12-step work possible in the early days was almost unbearable. They weren't asked to speak at AA meetings because they were making money out of AA. They were referred to as a necessary evil, for goodness sakes. The elders thought that they could regain some measure of virtue, it was thought, if they worked for AA real cheap. But again, as Bill says, the hardworking secretary was not professionalizing the 12th step. She was just making it possible. And then he points to all the work that needs to be done at the foundation. 8 tons of books, sacks of letters, the Lonely Heart Eskimo, the growing pains of thousands of groups. Those types of things need to be answered by people who know. Right contacts with the world outside have to be maintained. And he's speaking of the value that our AA members can bring to these services. So he says, perhaps fear will always lurk in every AA heart that one day our name will be exploited by somebody for real cash, and even the suggestion of such a thing can whip up a hurricane. But hurricanes have a way of mauling with equal severity both the just and the unjust. And he goes on to give examples of alcoholics who have gone into fields related to alcoholism. A university wanted an AA member to educate the public on alcoholism. A corporation wanted a personnel man familiar with alcoholism. A state drunk farm wanted a manager. A state alcohol commission wanted a paid researcher. Are such activities to be branded as professionalism under the AA tradition? We think the answer is no. He says the problem becomes when AAs who are employed in those fields start to thump the tub for their pet enterprise. For this reason, some very good causes, all connected with them, suffered unjust criticism from AA groups. Yet, when you look at the job that they were hired to do, not a single one of them had been hired to do AA's 12-step work. The violation in these instances was not professionalism at all, it was breaking anonymity. He says AA's sole purpose was being compromised and the name of Alcoholics Anonymous was being misused. So he says, we see now that we have no right or need to discourage AAs who wish to work as individuals in these wider fields. This is the exciting welter of events which has finally cast up AA's tradition of non-professionalism. Our 12-step work is never to be paid for, but those who labor in service for us are worthy of their hire. There have been and there will always be opportunists trying to make money from the AA program. As unfortunate as that is, it is so important to include a careful study of the traditions when working with newcomers as soon as possible, particularly Tradition 8's non-professional stance. On top of that, employing alcoholics for services which we might have to engage non-alcoholics points to the need for a better understanding of how our service structures make carrying the message possible. In both cases, examining how that evolved begs the title, You Get What You Pay For. Well, it helps to know what we are paying for, and it helps to know how we got to where we are today. Bill's essay, written in 1950s on this tradition, primarily focused on groups paid workers that made 12-step work possible in their immediate proximity, such as clubs. That included the maintenance of facilities, answering phones, written queries, and other supporting tasks. But then Bill went on to make the point that furthermore, the foundation headquarters needed paid workers so that they could answer the countless pleas for help from all across the country and across the world. But now that was written in the 1950s. Flash forward 75 years later. Headquarters evolved to become the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous, and Alcoholics Anonymous World Services Incorporated is now established. And there are now 66 general service offices and literature distribution centers all across the world. I did not know this until I looked closely at this study. Therefore, I think it's important to track the progression from the AA of Bill's essay to the AA of today by dividing the original form into 4 parts. Through this progression, we'll see the anvils of experience that led to hammering out AA's 8th tradition. 1 of the original form. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional. The hallmark of the early fellowship was working with others for free. During the flying blind period, the fellowship navigated the hazards of some early alcoholics' expectations that included the belief that fellowship members should work with others for free. Yes, yes, I get that. That's how I stay sober. And voluntarily do the nitty-gritty and time-consuming labors that expanded the program's reach. Well, like cleaning the toilets in the clubhouse. Well, some of these things we balked. Bill's essay revealed how some of our early members were treated by their fellow alcoholics when they were meagerly compensated for tasks that did little more than make 12-step work easier for others. This unrealistic expectation would result in a hard-fought battle between the economic survival of AA's early members and the survival of AA itself. The problem centered around delineating actual 12-step work from the work that makes 12-step work possible. So guess who was AA's first paid professional? Dr. Bob. Bill and Dr. Bob devoted much of their time from June 1935 until March 1938 to carrying the message. That's a long time, folks. Bill had a few odd jobs with brokerage firms, but none of his attempts at regular work produced any substantial income. Dr. Bob was financially behind due to his drinking and struggled to rebuild his practice while working with drunks. But financial security was coming very slowly. So while the Rockefeller donation was a disappointment in terms of their larger plans for the fellowship, it did provide some sorely needed support for Dr. Bob, which Bill and Hank enthusiastically supported. Dr. Bob's access to City Hospital in Akron was churning up successful cases quickly. They needed the numbers to show the program worked. And Bill and Hank were confident at that point that they would be able to raise more money. In all likelihood, however, Dr. Bob did not share openly with the Akron squad that he was receiving money to continue working with alcoholics. As William Shaberg said, taking money for the work was still a taboo subject in Ohio. So what was Dr. Bob's compensation? In March 1938, Frank Amos wrote the first check to Dr. Bob for $500 from the Alcoholic Fund. Then, from September 1938 to April 1939, the Alcoholic Foundation allocated $200 a month to Dr. Bob. But, unfortunately, early in March 1939, when the Foundation trustees realized funds were needed to get the book printed, they assigned to Bill the very unpleasant task of telling Dr. Bob his monthly payments would be reduced from $200 to $50 a month for several months. Well, for goodness sakes, Dr. Bob was upset. He was so upset he wrote the foundation, but he never received a reply. And so goes the perils of relying on outside support for one's livelihood. But here's the point. During the flying blind period, while Dr. Bob was receiving financial support, Bill, Hank, and Fitz M. scrambled to find more funding while they continued to craft future policies for AA and work on the book. In short, Dr. Bob was paid to do what was eventually called 12-step work. Bill, Hank, and Fitz frantically sought support to make 12-step work possible. Quite the reverse of the eighth tradition. But to be clear, they were concerned about professionalizing AA as evidenced by Hank P.'s recommendations for the Alcoholic Foundation in 1938 and the story of the lay therapist job in Tradition 2, in which Bill had to turn down a paid position. Part 2 of the original form, we define professionalism as the occupation of counseling alcoholics for fees or hire. Charlestown's job offer had to be tempting for Bill, especially given he was just over 1 year sober and had great difficulty finding a stable income. As we said, Hank, via the group conscience, helped Bill to see the ramifications of this very difficult decision. This job offer is one of the more fateful turning points in AA's history. Who knows what might have happened if Bill had actually become a lay therapist? From William Shaberg's Writing the Big Book. So, when funding for Dr. Bob became possible through the Rockefeller donation, why didn't Bill and Hank hesitate? Dr. Bob's future compensation was in stark contrast to Towns's offer. The obvious problem with the lay therapist job was that Bill's results would have benefited and been credited to Towns Hospital. In contrast, Dr. Bob's pay originated from a donation given to the fellowship for developing the program. That is, Dr. Bob's work directly helped the fellowship by growing the number of recovered alcoholics, which in turn provided for the book more evidence that the program worked. The distinctions were in the motive for support and the source of income. And recall that even though he was disappointed, Charles Towns continued to keep Bill, Hank, and Fitz on their feet financially without any obligation to the hospital. No matter if Bill's program was successful, Towns Hospital would have benefited from such a successful treatment program. In short, the three men received pay for helping Bill get the book across the finish line. In short, for making 12-step work possible. Some early members believed that AA alcoholics should not work in recovery-related fields. Why would they would be capitalizing on AA, so much so Bill devoted a lot of his essay to this problem. He mentions it again in the AA Traditions pamphlet. He says, it is logical and valuable for AAs to enter professionally related fields. They need only avoid breaking their AA anonymity. Certainly, Bill must have thought about the town's hospital offer when he said that AAs going into alcohol therapy should never trade on their AA connection, that there is not and can never be any such thing as an AA therapist. Well, here's the bottom line, at least as far as I see it. AAs in recovery-related fields are wonderful. Such professionals certainly can recommend AA to their clients. But when AAs break their anonymity with clients or others at their place of employment, they pose at least two hazards. One is the implication that paid 12-step work is acceptable in some situations, and two, that their place of employment is affiliated with AA. AAs in recovery-related fields can do unpaid 12-step work when they are not working at their jobs. Part 3 of the original form. But we may employ alcoholics where they are going to perform those services for which we might otherwise have to engage non-alcoholics. Such special services may be well recompensed. In April 1939, Bill, Hank, and 44-ish shareholders controlled Works Publishing and in effect owned the newly published book. In the first 6 months after the book was published, sales were sluggish and all of the early co-founders were struggling financially. Bill and Ruth Hawk were continuing to work on behalf of the fellowship in Hank's honors dealer's office in New Jersey. Discouragingly, work at that time generally consisted of going to the mailbox to see only a trickle of queries about the book. In the meantime, Hank started drinking. With some publicity in September and October 1939, the trickle of inquiries became a flood of calls and correspondence. Bill and Ruth answered everything that came into the office, but quickly found that they needed help. With no money to pay for staff, Bill wanted to move the AA office to Manhattan, where there were more volunteers available to help. Hank was understandably upset, as he probably could feel his lifeline of control slipping away. Hank's desperation surfaced in late 1939 when he wrote a disjointed letter to Bill that reverberated with active alcoholism. Hank's letter to Bill was a desperate attempt to keep the potentially lucrative Works Publishing separate from the Alcoholic Foundation. In a conflation of reasonable questions and distracting platitudes, Hank's plausible questions included: would money that would be spent on an office be better spent for traveling expenses for people spreading the good news? And would an office tend to take away the endearing amateurism of this work and tend to professionalize it? Well, these are certainly reasonable questions, but scattered before, in between, and after were rambling detractors, among which included, did Jesus Christ have an office, and will there be a grand poobah of AA? After a few more befuddling comments, Hank got to the heart of his concerns. He wrote, I honestly believe the tide is rising on the book. You and I are going to profit from it if it rises high enough. If and when the time came, I think we would find it the subject of less criticism if the book company be the giver, not the receiver. Well, that is, Hank and Bill should keep their 2/3 ownership of Works Publishing and thus 2/3 of the profits. As it was, Bill knew that the fellowship was already starting to fall apart over the stock deal. Hank's suggestion definitely would have resulted in more criticism, if not a full-scale revolt. Hank continued with an additional reason to keep the publishing company at honors dealers. He said, another point, essentially, Works Publishing Company, if successful, must be a business organization. Does this mix with humanitarian and charitable work? In other words, how can you successfully operate what might be a large business organization when everyone naturally feels a proprietary interest on it? Well, here, Hank's point was very important in that Works Publishing eventually would have to incorporate to adhere to business laws for the state of New York, which meant facing the perils of money and property. Such an entity would require employees and professional management, which in turn would incur additional expenses, all of which had not yet been sorted out by the fellowship. And it's necessary because our own members will never give enough to support our worldwide services. However, Hank failed to see that incorporation did not preclude oversight by the foundation. Bill's reply to Hank made it clear that their days of making free-willing business decisions on behalf of the fellowship had come to an end. Bill committed the book to the fellowship by saying, the gang's money have gone into the venture. They have contributed material for half of the book. They wrote all the stories in the back, and the work are unavoidably tied together. On a conciliatory note, Bill then acknowledged indirectly that Hank had been right about tempering the book with fewer Christian references among his other wonderful contributions. He said, when the book was written, I know I found it sometimes hard to accept suggestions and ideas from you when they really should have been accepted. Nevertheless, Bill added a but that could well have been a reference to the stock venture. He said, and then when it comes to the business end of our deal, I think you have always had the same difficulty in considering my advice. Finally, Bill pointed to the crux of Hank's inability to weigh in on the fellowship. Another point, the gang would like you to come back with us very much. Well, you can see all of this was a conflated mess. In 1940, shortly after his written exchange with Hank, Bill wrote, from the beginning, we've wrestled with the question of the alcoholic worker. He seemed an absolute necessity and probably was that until recently. Bill was referring to the compensation provided to members of the fellowship, that is, Dr. Bob, Hanks, Fitz, and himself, before and shortly after the publication of the book. Bill acknowledged that such compensation was essential to getting the book published, but that it had to end for the sake of not professionalizing 12-step work. So again, it is a convoluted mess. However, by 1940, Bill was devoting all of his time at headquarters while Dr. Bob was continuing his 12-step work. As a result, the co-founders carried the burden of starting a life-saving program that was growing beyond comprehension and at the same time was taxing their ability to survive and support their families. This sticky problem would take a very long time to resolve through the careful wording of the AA Eighth tradition. And the big book itself was a complex issue that contributed to the problem. After the foundation secured ownership of the big book, the trustees awarded Dr. Bob royalties in part to compensate for the loss of income he had suffered in order to get the book printed. Without any compensation, Bill continued working at headquarters, answering entreaties for help. The obvious solution was to award Bill royalties for the book. But some of the members argued, wouldn't royalties from the sales of the book be considered paid 12-step work? Well, as much as Bill was trying to encourage unity by respecting group consciences, in this instance he insisted that the foundation should sell the book. In later years, he could point to this particular decision to override the group conscience as one that was pivotal to AA's future success. He said, "Our history proves that sometimes the idealistic majority of that day was seriously mistaken. Had there been no book earnings for the headquarters and no royalties for Dr. Bob and me, AA would have taken a very different and probably disastrous course." I have to wonder if Bill was thinking about this particular event when he crafted the principle of listening to the minority opinion in group consciences. Nevertheless, easier to see in retrospect, Bill continued to paint a vivid picture of the disasters that would have followed, including no traditions, no General Service Conference. Awarding Bill royalties wasn't setting a precedent, since particularly with Dr. Bob already receiving them. As the very first AA members and as earliest contributors to the growth of the movement, Dr. Bob and Bill more than earned their right to royalties from the sales of the book. Dr. Bob provided evidence that the program worked through his tireless efforts carrying the message, and Bill wrote the book. Now, about Bill in particular, Pass It On posited that the book royalties he received were not payment for 12-step work, they were payment for special services. But the money nonetheless freed his time to do 12-step work that he unceasingly did. Tradition 8 also made acceptable the proper compensation in years to come of other special workers. Part 4 of the original form. But our usual AA 12-step work is never to be paid for. Well, unfortunately, today Bill would probably add, or a paid AA step sponsor. This unfortunate departure from AA's spiritual principle of 12-step work freely given currently does occur. However, two people are complicit, the one who's charging the fee and the one who's paying the fee. Which brings us to today's paid service workers in AA. Knowing what I know now, I truly believe that the study of the 8th tradition should include an overview of how much this tradition, after more than 70 years, has helped AA to grow worldwide. There are intergroup and central office and other AA entities around the world in the area where the group is in. These offices rely on volunteers, but may be large enough to employ one or two special workers. Among their multitude of tasks, they purchase literature and other materials, answer inquiries, refer prospects to members, and facilitate committees' activities, including local outreach. Generally, per Tradition 9, a committee of AA volunteers manage or have oversight over these important offices, finance, and staff. Per Tradition 9. We will be looking at that next week. Now, there are General Service Conferences. In 1955, the conference became the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous and was established as the guardian of world services of AA and of the 12 traditions. The conference now is the group of mostly volunteers who meet regularly to shape AA policy. The General Service Office carries the staff that will help to enact those policies. In the first conference charter, Conference North American section was referred to as a service body only, never a government for AA. Bill said in that charter that other sections of the conference established in foreign lands to accommodate language and geographical needs could be added. But as it turned out, that was logistically an impossibility. So instead, there is now a General Service Conference of the US and Canada and there are 62 other general service conferences around the world. The conferences are committees, again, made up of volunteers. They decide on AA policy, literature, and other current issues, and the trustees carry out within limits the wishes of the conference. To Tradition 8, the General Service Office staff do the work. AA paid staff serve the set of trustees committees and their corresponding conference committees. Over 70 years of rapid growth in AA worldwide has resulted in 66 general service offices and literature distribution centers around the world. That is where paid staff are. A wealth of information to help groups under their geographical areas and to operate effectively within and beyond their meetings are available in these offices. But they cannot survive without AA members' support. The paid service workers at the General Service Office in New York. Well, in 1955, the Alcoholic Foundation, or headquarters, became the General Service Office. Standing offices, sometimes referred to as desks, are literature, corrections, public information, cooperation with the professional community, accessibilities and treatment, group services, and archives. The office staff also help facilitate and carry out the wishes of the conference when it meets, regional forums, and international conferences. The administrative offices are essential for running a business operation, such as IT services and digital media. At the General Service Office in New York, there are 12 staff who are also members of AA that rotate their positions every 2 years. They served, this was as of 2022, 70,000 groups or 1.4 million members, or 1,500 groups or 38,000 members in corrections facilities. And of course, they serve the conference. Alcoholics Anonymous World Services Incorporated is our publishing arm. Its purview is over all services, publishing, finance, archives, and it's responsible for AA's website and broad publishing efforts. It facilitates translated literature, and that includes Arabic, Bulgarian, Chinese, Indonesian, Italian, Punjabi, and Zulu languages, only to name a very few. One can go to the literature sales catalog and look in the back and be stunned by the different translations that are available. There is also a Loners Internationalist meeting bulletin for members who are in remote areas, are serving in occupations not tied to a geographic region, such as merchant sailors, or are culturally restricted from participating in AA events. The International Office serves as a liaison to the General Service offices in other countries and respond to queries from outside the U.S. and Canada. Free service material, resources based on groups' experiences, some AA historical summaries, and AA data capsules are all captured in our General Service Office, and most can be accessed online. In all, they serve 49,000 groups, or almost 500,000 members outside of the U.S. and Canada, for a total of 120,000 groups, or almost 2 million members worldwide. There are 180 plus countries, including the 66 autonomous general service offices that we mentioned. So how do conferences, which are the volunteers, mostly volunteers, and the general service offices collaborate? The World Services meeting, started in 1969, is now biennial and is held alternately in New York and an overseas country. The meeting is an unincorporated association of service structures of Alcoholics Anonymous in various countries. So the conferences all over the world send their delegates to the World Services meetings. We send our at-large trustees, and they meet together to discuss how AA is doing in their respective areas. The international office at AAWS organizes and provides the report for the AA World Service Meeting. I urge everyone to go online and access the World Service Meeting report. Go back to the section in which the countries give their individual reports. It is moving to see what many countries are overcoming to still carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. There is also the AA Grapevine in Lavinia, publisher of multimedia content that's accessed directly from the fellowship. The AA Grapevine carries the message through print, streaming, and other platforms, and is embraced as the International Journal of Alcoholics Anonymous. It also produces the bi-monthly Spanish language magazine Lavinia. And now they have podcasts and lots of other media. And of course, who has oversight? That would be the trustees of the General Service Board. They have custodial oversight over both of those corporations, and they exercise it by electing directors of each. While the General Service Board does not interfere with the daily operation, it does have the ultimate responsibility for seeing that both corporations operate in the best interest of the fellowship as a whole. So on the slide, there's a list of concepts that center around the General Service Board and these corporations. Well, Hank thought that AA should be separate from the spiritual, that the spiritual should be separate from the material by keeping the publishing company separate from the foundation. It turns out that AA has separated the material, but has retained spiritual accountability through its volunteers and its paid staff. Hank could not imagine a system that would separate the material from the spiritual. Bill created that system through AA's service structure, and we now know through the 12 traditions, and finally through the 12 concepts. Those who labor in service for AA are worthy of their hire. Like the expenses of other AA activities, those of the General Service Office are generally met by group and individual contributions. Since these contributions do not completely cover the cost of AA's World Services, publishing income is used to help offset the deficit. It does seem that Bill's choice to override the group conscience about giving the big book away may have been a good decision. So coming up is the 9th tradition. The 8th and 9th traditions make possible a service structure that allows AAs around the world to share the solution to their common problem, alcoholism. Next, we'll explore the structure of AA's volunteer service committees. There are inextricable connections between Traditions 8 and Traditions 9. Those connections ensure our unity and common welfare worldwide. And we will ask the most important question: are alcoholics able to be responsible for Alcoholics Anonymous? For comments and questions, or if you want to be on the mailing list, please contact me at whatslenderthreads@gmail.com. For other resources and workshop flyers, see www.onwhatslenderthreads.com. And thank you.